So my friend recently sent me this Reddit post where this person stated that he thinks that the Sony straight out of the camera JPEGs looks better than Fuji. He has a recipe to make your Sony camera have the classic chrome film simulation look. Let's read what he has to say. In this post, the Reddit poster also talks about getting a Leica look, a Ricoh GR look as well, but we're only going to be focusing on what he has to say about the classic chrome film simulation. Unpopular opinion: Sony now has the best JPEG colors. To me, this is nothing new. I thought this was the case when I first used the A7S III, but now, over 2 years later, the myth of the Fujifilm SSOC JPEG is still out there. Maybe a lot of people just don't have the Sony camera with the Bionz XR chip and the new color science that came with it. Or maybe people just didn't bother to try the new creative style because the old one was pretty bad. That's me. I'm guilty of this because I didn't really care for it. It's not much leaders in like this kind of space where people do create recipes for Sony. Like, you know, for Fujifilm, we got Fuji X Weekly. Richie, he posts a shit ton of recipes for free, right? So there's just a collection and library that we can go and just, you know, experiment with, but I don't see it for Sony at all. So I just think there needs to be more like mad scientists like Richie for the Sony community. Simply put, the standard look on the new Sony cameras are just as good as any other brand. In fact, I think it's better than Fuji, on par with Nikon and Canon, except Nikon and Canon don't have creative styles, which is where the fun begins. The IN creative style, at first you might think this is for Instagram, and maybe that was the intention, but what this really emulates is classic chrome on Fujifilm. Again, almost exactly the same, except this setting has a fade effect by default with a high black point. So the similarity is not obvious, but if you back it down to 0, you realize that the warm tones and the bluish greens are indistinguishable from the classic chrome film simulation. So here are the settings that you must follow. I'll leave it on the screen for you guys so you guys can pause it and you guys can put this into your Sony camera, any Sony cameras with the new Bionz XR chip. So I've already input this into the Sony a6700 and I spent some time going out and taking some sample images for you guys. And now we're going to have some fun. I'm going to share some images taken on the Fujifilm X-T5 and the Sony a6700. Both are shot with the same lens for their mounts. I got the Tamron 1770 f2.8. I do have one for the E mount and one for the X mount. So I tried to control this test as much as I can, and getting the same lens is one of them. And I also had the white balance for both cameras set at 5600 Kelvin. And I shot at the same exposure and settings for the most part. Now, it's up to you guys to decide which one is the real classic chrome film simulation. Let's go. So what do you think? This is really close, huh? I'm really impressed with these colors that came out when put side by side. I'm going to leave the answers for you right here so you guys can see how many you guys got right. Like, some of these shots were so hard to tell. I asked a few people on Instagram what they thought, and you know, these are people that are Fuji shooters or were Fuji shooters at some point in their life. Some of them chose the Sony photos as their real classic chrome film simulations, which is freaking insane. So it blows my mind that Sony cameras can do this. There are a few things that could be a dead giveaway that looks like it was shot on a Sony camera, especially this shot right here with the flowers. That is the reds. I've never seen this type of reds before on my Fujifilm camera. Never before having shot with Fujifilm for almost 7 years now. If I were to do a blind test, this would be one of those things that I just think looks like, where I just think this is a sign that it was shot on a Sony. Other than the reds, it's really hard to tell sometimes. Like, I have a problem looking at it side by side. But there is another giveaway, that is if the shot is, if a shot has a certain crispiness to it and a sharpness to it that you get from a Sony camera. Even though the X-T5 has 40 megapixels, I find that the Sony a6700 26 megapixels to be much sharper. So if you can see that sharpness and that crispness right away, that's another sign that it was from a Sony. Like I said, I'm very impressed with some of these images. Some of these shots that I took, I prefer the Sony better than the Fuji, which is freaking crazy. I'll be more accepting to more recipes from Sony, because this is just freaking nuts on how close it got to classic chrome. Maybe we can get Richie from Fuji X Weekly to cook us a few recipes for a Sony camera. That would be dope. Maybe he can work with these creative styles and create us some cool recipes for Sony. How about it, Richie? Hey. So yeah, what are your thoughts on this? Let me know your comments down below. Fuji shooters, are you shocked by this result? Sony shooters, do you guys have any more recipes you guys can recommend to me? I want to play around with some more recipes for Sony cameras, because this has been really fun to compare side by side. Don't forget to subscribe for more Fuji and Sony content. And if you're interested in any of the gears mentioned in this video, I'll leave the links down in the description below. And thanks so much.